Boogie House, Chapter 4, read by the author. Lumber Junction is a town bedecked in a blue collar, a town of truck drivers and iron workers, of men who work on cars and race cars and make meth in their cars. People who live in the junction commute and never really leave. They never really think to leave. They just stay because that's how it is. In that way, it was 1,000 other towns in the nation, and also no other town in the nation. Distinctly generic, maybe. The town could have gone in another direction and prospered so that its people did not struggle to make ends meet, but it did not. And the result is a picked-over hull of a place. It used to be that the timber coming through gave people jobs, and the junction was, for a short time, a hub of activity. It was situated just far enough away from Dublin and Vidalia to be pleasant, and yet close enough to enjoy the comforts of slightly larger towns. In addition, the people have mellowed to the point that they seem somewhat zombified by life here, or at least lulled into a faux drugged existence. Bootleggers and cattle thieves and outlaws used to occupy the city, but those types, holdovers from a specific era in American history, have gone away, leaving behind desperate working-class folks. Since there's no income flooding in, the remaining businesses are closing. The junctions downtown could exist in any number of desolate American cities, places where the world has gotten up and moved on. It is the starter wife that never quite managed to find a suitable follow-up partner. The pickup I drove belonged to an old buddy of mine who said if I could get it running, I could have it. That was 2 years ago. I'd put some plugs and wires in it, replaced the battery, and rebuilt the transmission. 3 hours here or there on weekends. I kept it in order to haul things off to the landfill or help people move. Insurance was cheap, though I imagined it was about to spike. The good side was I wouldn't be driving it or anything else much longer. The other car was totaled, so the pickup would have to do for now. I parked the F-150 in back and rounded the parking lot looking for the truck I had seen last night. A moment of clarity saw the particulars of the taillights flashing in my mind, and I thought I might be able to recognize them. No luck. I went inside where the mood was at least artificial enough to make me forget about how fucked up the last 24 hours had been. Virgil's bar was a comforting, reputationless watering hole. There weren't many fights, no one sold meth out of the bathrooms, and women going home with someone generally did so for the company and not exchanged for money. But there were exceptions to every rule. The haze of smoke and long-soured beer hung as thick as humidity in the air, and the reddish glow of neon gave me an unpleasant feeling. Reminded me of the Boogie House, somehow. The people who didn't stare made a point of not staring. I knew what I was doing by showing up here. At a bar. If the junction were bigger, there'd be more for struggling alcoholics to do, more distractions, more things to keep me out of trouble. People in the program say that excuses only get you so far. What those people don't realize is that an excuse only needs to get you to the bar, get that first beer open, then the excuses go right out the fucking window. My best friend was nowhere to be found. Deuce was usually propped up in here in the evening for a couple of beers before heading home, but his usual spot at the bar was occupied by a woman whose face was turned down and displeased. I ordered a High Life and a shot of Beam and was halfway done with my beer and wholly done with the excuse that had put me in the seat when 2 old-timers came down to say hey. "This ain't official business, I take it," the bearded cockeyed one said, drawing his lips back into a half-teasing smile. "Unless I was secretly hired by Miller Coors," I replied, taking a long tug on my High Life. "How are you two doing?" Lyle Kearns and Red Tyson, 2 old pulpwooders claiming to be retired but really just too worn down to do the back-breaking work anymore. What made them best friends was they liked to drink up their Social Security checks every month. "I shouldn't be able to complain, but sometimes I still do," Lyle said. Red nodded in agreement. Lyle was burly but withered, broad-faced and sporting a white sea captain's beard. Red, on the other hand, had no distinguishing features, except that he looked like a baseball knocked way out of shape. He was big and blunt and dumb, and you could probably pick him up and beat someone to death with him and he wouldn't register it had happened. But even though they looked like they were two old Chevys left on blocks in the yard, they weren't useless. A little worse for wear, but not 1 foot in the grave. Red had spent 7 years in Telfair for beating his sister's abusive husband to ground beef with a piece of angle iron, just for hearing it was happening. So occasionally, they helped justice along with their own brand of righteous violence. Word was, Arnie Hester paid them $500 to kick the shit out of her brother-in-law, Carter, for drunkenly breaking his wife's jaw. Carter fled to North Carolina, but unsuccessfully evaded Lyle and Red, who brought back a lopsided version of the man. A warrant was issued for them, but it was never carried out, which had only given them cause to continue their particular form of backwoods vigilantism. I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. It seemed a little too eager in my mouth. Y'all heard anything out of the Leland Brickmeyer camp recently? Neighbor trouble? Lyle remarked, elbowing Red in what he no doubt thought was a sly move. The two of them chuckled and twisted onto the seats next to me. He's richer than hell, but that ain't news. He thought for a moment and then snapped his fingers, as if he had stumbled onto something. He's thinking about national government work. Might try his hand at a Senate run. They keep their private lives tighter than a duck's asshole, so you won't find shit or shinola on him. I nodded, pretending to mull over the information. Anyone with half a heartbeat in this town knew that Leland Brickmeyer's ultimate ambition was to spend most of his year in Washington. He'd done all he could to tip over this town in his favor. Like any kind of narcissist, he was always on the lookout for a new group to court. I don't think it's the political run I'm looking for, I said. You think he might have something to do with that old boy that was found on his land? I don't know, I said. Just seems curious is all. Lyle nodded. Man's got too much riding on his career to have bodies turn up on his land. Red clinked his glass against Lyle's. Drink to that. You ain't seen anything out of the ordinary out there? For a split second, I thought I might tell them the story of the night the lights came on in the Boogie House, but I thought better of it and shook my head. Nothing different from usual, I said. Nah. Well, you need any help from us, Lyle said. All you got to do is ask. I think I might go talk to him, I said. Maybe rattle his cage a little bit, just to see what he says. Red and Lyle passed a lighter between them to get their cigarettes going. The smell was dankly pleasant, something about smoke and beer mingling in a bar. He's got no reason to admit boo to you. Like I said, he's looking to take up running for a U.S. Senate seat in 2010. Probably offer you the whole Brickmeyer estate and hush money before he lets something like this come to light. I finished off the beer and paid for 2 more for the pulp waters. Well, keep an ear out, I told them, and then I left. Oh, and if you see any suspicious trucks around here, let me know. Lyle said, in my eyes, buddy, everybody's suspicious. I put Screamin' Jay Hawkins on as I drove home, turning the volume as loud as I could stand. He was a dude I listened to whenever I was out at night, riding the lightless back roads in search of something I might never find. Headlights appeared in my rear view a couple miles down the road. I had lowered the windows to let in the smell of wet grass and honeysuckle. I tapped the gas to give myself a few car lengths lead. If I couldn't avoid the situation, my .45 lay under the seat. I turned up, whistling past the graveyard, and straightened in my seat, ready for anything. The truck stormed up, so close I thought it might ram me, and I tightened my knuckles over the steering wheel. Sometimes I have problems with impulse control, or so I'm told. I became acutely aware of what would happen if I just popped out of the driver's side door holding my pistol. It's not worth it, I kept telling myself. I was trying to recall whatever cobbled together 12-step language people had recited to me whenever I was at my worst. Make a fearless moral inventory and give yourself power over to a misunderstanding God and all of that. However, just as I was about to lay out a case for letting this go, the truck reared up and nudged my back bumper, just enough to make me fishtail. It didn't send me off the side of the road, but it pissed me off. That was it for me. Sometimes I can't help but drop the whole jug of gasoline into the fire to see what happens. I waited for the perfect opportunity. When the high beams reached into my cab and widened out the rear view, I clenched my teeth, feeling the temple muscles lock up, and then I let the brake pedal have it with both feet. I stamped so hard I thought the pedal might punch a hole in the floorboard. My tires squealed on the wet asphalt like a wounded dog, and the rear end veered drastically to one side. I waited for the inevitable, crushing impact, my whole body clenched like a fist. But nothing happened. Once my truck stopped, absolute silence was all that rushed up to meet me. The truck had somehow swerved and missed me, and it was now speeding off into the distance. It was the same truck, all right, and I caught sight of one of those hellishly red taillights disappearing yet again. Sitting there, truck idling, watching the taillights become smaller, I had a choice. One voice was sounding calm, telling me to let it go. Chasing dangerous rednecks down a curvy patch of highway would only result in trouble. I knew that. Somehow, there was a second, equally convincing voice, speaking in whispers about the discarded body I had found. Then a phrase came to me, one that was both beautiful and dangerous, one that had gotten me halfway to this point. "Aw, fuck it," I said. I stomped the gas pedal on my aging Ford. What the other guy probably didn't know was I'd put a low enough gear in the transmission that, completely wound out, it could top off at 115, easy. Once I got up to speed, trees and road reflectors passed in a near psychedelic blur. With no guiding moon and me outrunning the headlights, it was tantamount to driving with my eyes closed. I focused on the electric red triangles, hoping I hadn't forgotten about some hairpin curve ahead of me. The diesel on that lead truck, a V8 GMC behemoth, could get up and go a sight better than I thought. In fact, the thing could flat out scoot, but I managed to keep up. It topped a steep hill, and I accelerated through the next curve to make up ground. Over another hill, I saw a reflection, and for a moment I thought I saw a deer's eyes. I backed off, let the truck take a sizable lead. It dawned on me how crazy I was acting. I had the tag number memorized. All it would take was a single phone call to get the info, even for a former cop. When I passed the reflection, I saw it wasn't eyes at all, but the text on the door of a Lumber Junction police cruiser, and I blew right past it. The lights went on immediately, and he pulled out behind me. Apart from the fact that I was speeding, I'd been drinking as well. Good a lawyer as Gerald was, there was no way he could get me out of this. Topping 100 in the truck after shot and a couple beers meant at least a few months in lockup. You know, to think things over. I punched the gas and was quickly up over 100 again. That cop had set up shop out here because it was a great place to catch speeders. But he didn't realize that I knew the very routes he didn't expect me to take. If it had only taken me a second to memorize the truck's tag, then the officer behind me would only need moments to do the same. Rather than swerve, however, I tried to get as much distance between myself and his car as I could, as quickly as possible. I rounded a sharp corner, the weight of the truck threatening to spin it out, but I kept the tires on the asphalt and made a hard turn down a dirt road. The backside tires slid, and though the front end managed to hold, I couldn't keep the goddamn thing from fishtailing. Both sides of the road were surrounded by trees, and I slid into one pretty good with my rear quarter panel. I sort of bounced off and righted the truck before I went headlong into the row of trees on the other side. I killed the headlights and coasted to a stop as the cruiser sped past on the main highway, its own lights creating a symphony in the gaps between trees. I listened intently. If he saw me, I was a goner. No way I'd be able to get past him on this dirt road. But he didn't. He went on by, and both the lights and the sirens disappeared down the highway. I hoped he hadn't gotten my tag number. I guess I would know the next time I went into town because they'd be looking for a reason to bring me in. I spent the drive home wondering about the chase. No way the cruiser hadn't seen the truck, too, so why flip on the lights just for me? In whose pocket was the PD? They couldn't necessarily know the junker I was driving, but what really mattered was that, on sight, the cop had ignored that truck. Something to look into later. The questions plagued me well into the night, until consciousness melted away, and my waking life could not be distinguished from my dreams.